In the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, a German soldier scribbled his final letter home. "We are fighting over a kitchen. Yesterday, it changed hands 15 times. He never sent that letter. His body was found 70 years later, still clutching the paper, in what historians now call the most brutal urban battle in human history. But here's what most people don't know. The Battle of Stalingrad wasn't just one battle. It was hundreds of forgotten struggles, each more savage than the last. Picture this: August 1942. Adolf Hitler stands before his generals, pointing at a map. His finger lands on a city that bears the name of his greatest rival, Stalingrad. "Take this city," he commands, "and we break Russia's spine." What Hitler didn't realize was that he'd just signed the death warrant for an entire army. Stalingrad wasn't just another Soviet city. It stretched for 30 miles along the western bank of the Volga River, a crucial industrial powerhouse producing tanks, ammunition, and the lifeblood of the Soviet war machine. The city's tractor factory alone had been converted to produce T-34 tanks, sometimes rolling them directly off the assembly line into battle, unpainted and unmanned, except for factory workers who'd never fired a gun. Stalin's response was characteristically brutal. Order 227, issued just weeks before the battle, contained 3 words that would echo through history: "Not one step back." Any soldier who retreated would be shot. Any commander who allowed retreat would be executed. But the real forgotten story begins with the civilians. When the battle started, 400,000 people still lived in Stalingrad. Stalin refused to evacuate them, believing their presence would force his soldiers to fight harder. Nearly 500,000 men, women, and children trapped in what would become the deadliest killing field of the war. By the battle's end, only 10,000 would remain alive. On September 14th, the Germans reached the city center, but their maps didn't show what would become their first nightmare: a massive grain elevator that dominated the landscape like a concrete castle. 18 Soviet guardsmen turned this building into a fortress that would hold for 58 days. These weren't special forces or elite troops. They were naval marines, hastily transferred from the Pacific Fleet. Most had never seen urban combat. Their leader, Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, was just 24 years old. The Germans threw everything at them: tanks, artillery, dive bombers. The building caught fire 17 times. The defenders put it out 17 times. A German officer's diary, discovered decades later, describes the horror. "We have taken the kitchen, but the enemy holds the living room. We control the first floor, they control the second. Sometimes we meet on the stairs." This wasn't warfare. It was something new, something monstrous. The Germans had a word for it: Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Inside the grain elevator, conditions defied imagination. The defenders drank water mixed with motor oil from damaged vehicles. They ate wheat contaminated with brick dust and human remains. When ammunition ran low, they hurled bricks and chunks of concrete at the attackers. The elevator finally fell when the Germans brought in combat engineers with flamethrowers. Of the 18 defenders, only 3 survived by playing dead among their comrades' corpses for 2 days. Here's something your history teacher probably never mentioned. The deadliest sniper in Stalingrad wasn't the famous Vasily Zaitsev. It was a 20-year-old woman named Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Before the war, she'd been an amateur sharpshooter. By Stalingrad, she had 309 confirmed kills. But Pavlichenko wasn't alone. The Soviets deployed 3 all-female combat units to Stalingrad. The 586th Fighter Regiment flew outdated biplanes on night bombing runs. The Germans called them night witches because their planes made a whooshing sound that reminded them of broomsticks. These women flew up to 18 missions per night, sometimes landing with over 40 bullet holes in their aircraft. One pilot, Nadezhda Popova, flew 852 missions. When asked years later how she survived, she said something haunting: "When you're 19 and your country is invaded, you don't think about dying. You think about not letting your friends down." Female workers in the tractor factory continued assembling tanks, even as German shells fell around them. Some witnesses reported seeing women welding armor plates while the building burned above them. They worked until the Germans literally broke down the doors, and then they picked up rifles and fought. One particularly chilling account comes from a German soldier's letter. We captured the factory cafeteria today. The cooks, all women, had barricaded themselves in the kitchen. They fought us with knives and boiling water. We lost 8 men taking that kitchen. Sergeant Pavlov, remember him from the grain elevator? He wasn't done. In late September, he and 23 soldiers occupied a 4-story apartment building that would become the stuff of legend. For 58 days, this building, later named Pavlov's house, held against everything the German Sixth Army could throw at it. The building offered a clear line of sight for about a kilometer in 3 directions, controlling a crucial square. But what made Pavlov's house special wasn't its location, it was what happened inside. Pavlov's men discovered approximately 30 civilians hiding in the basement, mostly women and children. Instead of evacuating them, which was impossible, the soldiers integrated them into their defense. Children carried ammunition. Women tended wounds and cooked meals from dead horses found in the streets. One 10-year-old boy became their messenger, crawling through sewer pipes to maintain contact with Soviet command. The defenders turned the building into a maze of death. They knocked holes between apartments to move unseen. They placed mines in the hallways and rigged entire floors to collapse. One German assault group entered the building and simply vanished. Their bodies were found weeks later, walled up in a fake room. A German commander later testified that they lost more men trying to take Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. Think about that. An entire European capital fell easier than one apartment building in Stalingrad. By October, the battle centered on 3 massive factories: the Red October Steel Works, the Barricadi Arms Factory, and the Dzerzhinsky Tractor Factory. These weren't just buildings, they were cities within the city. Vast complexes of workshops, foundries, and assembly halls. The fighting here defied all military logic. Soldiers fought for individual rooms, machines, even workbenches. A Soviet report describes one workshop changing hands 23 times in a single day. The combatants were so close that artillery and air support became useless. You'd hit your own men as likely as the enemy. The factory floors became archaeological layers of horror. Bodies piled so high that both sides used them as fortifications. The heat from burning metal and constant explosions created temperatures that melted snow before it hit the ground. Veterans described fighting in a perpetual twilight, the sun blocked by smoke and ash that fell like black snow. In the Red October factory, workers had painted motivational slogans on the walls before the war. As the battle raged, soldiers died beneath these slogans, their blood literally rewriting the propaganda in a grotesque irony. One German soldier wrote, "We have taken the factory, but the Russians are still inside. They are above us, below us, behind the walls." November 19, 1942. While the Germans obsessed over taking the last few blocks of Stalingrad, they ignored reports of Soviet troops massing on their flanks. These flanks were held by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian forces, poorly equipped and deeply unmotivated allies of Germany. At 5 a.m., 3,500 Soviet artillery pieces opened fire in the largest barrage of the Eastern Front. The Romanian lines simply ceased to exist. Within hours, Soviet tanks were racing across the frozen steppe, encountering virtually no resistance. 4 days later, the 2 Soviet pincers met at the town of Kalash, completing the encirclement. The entire German Sixth Army, over 290,000 men, was trapped. Hitler's response was predictable and catastrophic. "Stand fast. I will never leave the Volga." General Paulus requested permission to break out while it was still possible. Hitler refused. He promised that the Luftwaffe would supply the army by air, a promise that anyone with basic math skills knew was impossible. The Sixth Army needed 700 tons of supplies daily. The Luftwaffe, on its best day, managed 289 tons. December in Stalingrad brought a new enemy, general winter. Temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees. German soldiers, dressed for a quick summer campaign, began dying faster from cold than from bullets. Frostbite claimed more limbs than Soviet shells. The airlift turned into a cruel joke. Transport planes arrived carrying useless items, millions of contraceptives, summer uniforms, decorations for a victory celebration that would never come. Meanwhile, soldiers were eating their horses, their leather boots, and worse. A German chaplain's diary from January reveals the horror. I have just performed last rites for 30 men. None were wounded. They simply lay down in the snow and refuse to get up. They call it giving themselves to the White Death. On January 31st, 1943, Paulus surrendered. Hitler had promoted him to field marshal the day before, hoping he would commit suicide rather than surrender. No German field marshal had ever been captured alive. Paulus chose life. Of the 91,000 Germans who surrendered, only 5,000 would ever see Germany again. The battle was over, but Stalingrad's suffering wasn't. The city was gone, 97% destroyed. Survivors emerged from basements and ruins like ghosts, many having lived underground for 5 months. Children had forgotten what sunlight looked like. The cleanup took years. Bodies were still being discovered in the 1950s. Even today, construction projects unearth remains. But perhaps the most forgotten aspect is what happened to the survivors. Soviet soldiers who'd been captured faced execution or the Gulag. Stalin considered surrender treason regardless of circumstances. Civilians who'd survived under German occupation were investigated as potential collaborators. Having survived Stalingrad guaranteed nothing except more suffering.